The Court of Public Opinion is a part of the Amateur Radio Network. Okay, this is the opening statements. We're going to talk about personal injury and expungement. I know this is probably an interesting topic because it's always the last rule, usually as we clear up cases. And a lot of times people run out of steam. Once they win their case or once they've filed their claim, they went through the process to clear up the cases. Unfortunately, you lose steam. So that's why I'm going to start here first. And the reason I decided to do it this way, because I realized that's usually the last line of defense to clear up the cases. That obviously, looking at some of the false reports, because there's plenty of them, and I embellish these reports, and that's happening on every level. It can happen personally. It can happen to companies. It's happening with identity fraud regarding your bank card. Oh gosh, you could go on and on. All these fraudulent claims. SSI, disability, fraudulently claiming that they have a disability. I mean, you could go on. People can actually make careers out of this, and that's really where we're at. And the reason I wanted to address this as our opening statement is because the very fact remains. Why we start from the beginning, or the end to the beginning, is usually the case itself usually gets heard, and obviously reports regarding expungements are last. And so we don't need to go through all the red tape of what happens when people make a claim regarding fraud, because there's plenty of it, okay? But we're on the personal injury end, and what happens to this, these individuals that are affected, the victims of fraud, okay? Well, these false reports and false claims are exaggerated, embellished, and it's hurtful and mean. What really comes as a result of this is this is how far these cases go. And a lot of times people don't get the opportunity because they financially can't afford to clear up the matter regarding fraud. And we can go into Medicare, Medicaid fraud, we can go into disability fraud. You can name a bunch of things why our country is in the trouble it's in, and it comes down to just basic fraud. So we're going to go into this. I'm going to take you through a timeline and I'll look at just one of the cases regarding domestic violence and domestic abuse of children in foster care. There are plenty of claims, but we never get to court. We never get that far. So, you know, there's definitely a place for victims' compensation. There's definitely a place to exploit this topic. And you can get the ear of the right people. They'll listen. And they're listening. And we're paying attention. There's just so many cases that you have to literally, well, not you per se, but our president needs to hire a team of field investigators to really get to narrow down to all the cases. But I mean, we could be here for a while. But let me go on to the list of mental health fraud, false imprisonment, domestic violence fraud, false imprisonments through, and this information would probably be more available if we had exact numbers, but that would be domestic violence task force, handicap fraud, financial, you know, because that is another problem we've run into. A lot of times people make false claims, domestic violence, fraud, which, you know, people that make these false claims, you lose your gun rights as a result. Landlord contracts, fraud, stolen property, people that actually are asked to protect somebody's property, you can go into that. Sexual abuse cases and reports of fraud. Identity theft fraud cases, bank card fraud. I mean, really what we want to establish here is we got to be dependable, reliable, and offer integrity and confidence. And the answers and solutions to some of these problems doesn't happen easily. Crime victims compensation, state attorney general is really where you start. A lot of times people will not get their answers quickly, but if you contact your state attorney general, they will investigate your claim. And same with anyone that is a victim of identity theft, and that's usually if you have Social Security and somebody steals your bank card. In that case, don't be afraid to report it because you will be held liable. Okay, so this is what puts people in situations that they don't want to be in, but they're forced into it, and it usually costs attorney fees, and it comes down to this. I said all that because we started somewhere with this, and I want to end it here. Really, what it comes down to is personal injury cases, and that's when you get into expungement, clearing up your case, clearing up what happened to you, and in some cases, people will go through family court. They all have all kinds of situations now with fraud. Anything that involves money, it seems there's something there. Family court. If there's like a formal diagnosis, especially if you have children that have been maybe abused or assaulted, that's under, protection because there are privacy laws involving children. Fraudulent reports that would remove somebody's gun rights, that's another case that obviously is getting underreported. And all these other fraudulent reports, accusations, things that can't be founded, okay? So let's go into more stuff. I'm establishing something here. I hope you get an idea why I'm going into this. These fraudulent reports, okay, involving involuntary institutionalizations. Looking at some of the cases here in Pennsylvania, we can look at the Second Mile program. A lot of these children, a lot of them were innocent of the circumstance they were put in. That's why we talk about personal injury, okay? And when you look at number of foster children that have been sexually assaulted or abused by their foster parents, that's not to say that there aren't people that don't, but we're just going to stick to the point about these fraudulent reports, okay? Prior to these claims, families and relatives were asked to attend court-ordered therapy. A lot of times what ends up happening is if the family doesn't show up for therapy, it's left into the court's hands. Court orders are court orders. And then it wasn't until the child aged out of foster care that the biological families misrepresented the child, now adult. In family court, that's considered fraud. False claims, fraudulent reports, child custody cases, there's plenty of that. So why did we address this? Because exactly what's happening, it's very hard to pin down who's who and what's what. And this is why the police say, unless they have real evidence of domestic violence, they end up caught up in all kinds of fraud. You actually have to prove domestic violence, physical injuries, just words alone. And this is what the reform is about here in Pennsylvania. In order to reform, they're starting with the crime bill. And they did that with the homicide, new changes in the homicide laws. Okay? And I spoke to Representative Becky Corbin, okay, regarding domestic violence. Because what ends up happening is the women's shelters in domestic violence cases, the woman's not truly free to do as she please. Like in some cases, they just like to go out and dance freely without being stalked or abused by their abuser. Save the humans, more or less. And it goes on to other things, pro-life issues, pro-choice. I mean, you could go on and on. How many false claims about why women are falsely claiming they were raped just to continue with an abortion? I mean, that's how bad this is getting. I have a list of things here of fraud. Okay? So how do you get around this? Okay? I mean, we could be here for a long time. A lot of people are indebted to people that are reliable and consistent and willing to take these cases. And the only reason we can't is that we don't have the backing. We don't have the education experience. I don't have the licensing to do it. But I worked on these cases. I've been involved in these cases. Unfortunately, sometimes as a primary plaintiff. That's why I can say it. I have disclosure and agreements I can't report on. I can't discuss all this stuff because of privacy concerns. But these are my cases. These are things that have happened to me. I've witnessed it or lived through it. Okay? I cannot disclose much more than that. I mean, at the rate I'm at right now, I have more reports of fraud, abuse that has gone on in families, in family court, for mental health reports, all kinds of fraud here. Do you know how hard it is to go through this and know and realize that this is a reality we face, that this is the dark side of it? This is the dark side. I mean, you can go into, some people will talk about the punitive damages because we can't disclose this information. And they're exactly right. Because there's actually damages. You can't falsely claim or falsely report or turn around and twist the words. Once you sign a privacy agreement, you're held to that. Okay? So there's some things you cannot speak to. We can just speak in general terms. So I took you through all that because basically all this comes down to is freedom. Being allowed to keep your freedom. The privilege of having your freedom. But as long as these cases still exist, you really truly are held to that. You're held to that standard. Unfortunately, what I end up in a situation, and many of you too have been through this. You've been through the foster care system. And they make false claims and false charges. Okay? And you are initially, the reason you're in the foster care system is because you were abused. The idea that anyone can continue the train wreck of abuse, whether it be in a foster parent or anyone in a position that has legal authority, is outrageous. We've asked these questions, but we go to the court of public opinion because we need you guys to start talking about it. There are many people that investigate this stuff on Steemit, on other different programs. One of the ones that have the best reputation? Steemit. I want to make sure I got this correct. Well, there are some websites that are taking real interest in these cases. I think the best thing, the investigators, these are citizen investigators that are getting involved. The best way we can actually get to the bottom of this is start tearing up these cases. And we have caseload after caseload going back 40 years of fraud, from property fraud to fraud regarding, possessing property. I don't say repossessions, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it goes on and on. And most of the time, people think they're in trouble. They're not in trouble. All it does is that's what it looks like on the surface. Okay? Unless you really hear the story, unless you hear both sides, it's really hard to decide who did what. And a lot of them were either directly or indirectly involved, and we can't say anything. We can't do anything. Our hands are tied. And that's what we told the state representatives. Our hands are tied. Because if you're a victim, the only thing you can do is let it go and move forward. And that's all you can do. Instead of going involved when I called on you guys to talk about the drama triangle a couple shows ago. You get together with a group, just like I'm showing you here on my video. You speak to the representatives. That's their job title. They don't have to get into specifics. At the end, you get some sweet justice. Because I don't know that I don't know if the court system's capable of clearing up all the fraud cases. I really don't. You got to start somewhere. And the reason I started where I want to end it is that the end result is expungement. Some people have lost careers as a result of fraud. They've lost property. All this stuff, a lot of that cannot be obtained or returned. So what really hurts about these personal injury cases is it involves families. And most time, the victim doesn't want to sue the family. That's what it comes down to. And it's embarrassing. It's humiliating for the victim. And all that aside, the victim has to somehow grapple with the idea that they may have lost their career over it. We're talking your school education is affected, everything. And there's a lot of people in situations now that because they've been victims of a crime, a cycle of crime victims, they can get compensation, but it's not going to clear up the, maybe school loans that you owe. I mean, the only place you can start is start with your representatives. The only freedom is get a hobby. Like in my case, my hobby is dance. That's why we do Erica's House, because our caseworker who passed away was a ballerina, and she was a very good one. It's really hard to look at these cases and try to wrap my head around it because I've been directly or indirectly affected by this. And we talked about secondary victims in previous posts. We've talked about why does a family go to that extreme? Why would they sue or steal property? I don't know. I don't always know. I don't know if I want to know, honestly. There's just a number of people that I've talked to that have been just coming to me, and we're just casually talking about it. Then, before you know it, once we get to the point, they start telling me that their bank card was compromised through a website and scam. I mean, and only things you can do from this point on is in the future goals are to continue on a career path, like in my case, radio. Other people have other options, but you got to continue. Build a future based on what you can do, not on what you can't do. So in the final summary of this, what I wanted to say is the best way to resolve these is through mediators. The easier you can dissolve these old agreements and start new agreements, because you're going to start new agreements. But this time you're wiser, smarter, and you're more aware. Unfortunately, people casually say, just put it behind you. Unfortunately, this does a lot of damage to people's careers and families. And what we're looking at in the news media today is this is damaging. This damages people. It hurts to watch what is happening around us. So it's very hard to listen to somebody casually say, just move forward. It can wreck people's lives for almost ever. I mean, the only way to overcome it and recover from damages. And I've worked for I was an apprentice to investigation recovery. You know, they skip trace back then. I mean, that's a lot has changed since technology. In fact, there's more and more crimes. It's incredible because we couldn't even find clients. Now we have so many clients. It's very difficult. The best way to move forward is just do your best. If you go to the extremes, like you hire somebody or you work with dependable, reliable, confident personal injury attorneys that have integrity, expungement and fraud investigators through family court, domestic violence court, you know, orphans court, all of it on down. There's just so many cases where crime victims compensation is available. Here in Pennsylvania, we're hoping and praying that we elect the right judges because we have an election coming up and we want to know what's going to happen with these cases. A lot of them are old cases. We can't do anything with them, but hopefully the laws can make adjustments to the current laws about these cases, because now what you got is you got people coming forward about abuse cases that go back to the 80s, sometimes even the 70s. So the laws are changing. The representatives in Pennsylvania are listening. And there are crime victims that are coming out that didn't have the chance to report it. They were threatened back in the 60s and 70s. So they didn't have an opportunity to have their case heard. So hopefully the laws will be adjusted and changed. We might not be able to go to court, but here at the Court of Public Opinion, hopefully we can go forward from here. While many of us may have been victims, many of us have survived, and we've been crime victims, or many of us have survived, endured situations, we can't maybe erase what happened in the past. We can go forward and we can talk to our representatives. We can start electing people locally here in the Pittsburgh region and abroad and throughout Pennsylvania. And I hope that people more or less copycat what's happened in Pennsylvania because, you know, obviously while we can't maybe have retrials or even a lot of these cases may have been thrown out, the best foot forward is start being an advocate, work with us, help us, support us, okay? We're trying to change the way things are done. I spoke to somebody in Oregon about foster care abuses that happen throughout the system, and we're duplicating that here in Pennsylvania with our representatives at the state level and at the federal level. At the very end, maybe there's some sweet justice. Thank you for listening to the Court of Public Opinion.